Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 on our video on the C17 Flight Simulator 2024. First video dealt with getting this thing started. This video will be dealing with things like the automatic pilot, navigation, takeoff, stuff like that. Let's get started. So climbing on inside this one, you've got everything set up last time. There's a couple little things we need to do to get ready for takeoff. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get ourselves some flaps. And this aircraft knows how to flap. And if I actually were to go over here and push that button, you can see just how far those things are tipping down there to give us that extra little bit of help for takeoff. We're not massively loaded on today's mission, so we don't have to stress about it too much. It's just one of those things you want to kind of be mindful of. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and kill the park and brake. I'm just going to release it like that. You can see them popping up on the floor. And now to get this thing rolling, you just give it a little tiny bit of thrust, and it will roll pretty good for you. It does that little glitchy thing every once in a while. I think that's a flight sim thing. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to make our way towards the runway here. It's worth noting that when you taxi this, the wheel that steers is in a very awkward spot. It's basically underneath your right leg, if you want to think about it. So when you're steering, just be mindful that you have to kind of go out before you can actually start steering. So you have to kind of go out a little bit, and then I'm going to, oh my goodness, I'll kind of kick it over, give it just a little bit of thrust. There we go. Delightful. Nice. Come over this way. I don't know why they decided to put the lights in the middle of the ground. I feel like that's a bit of a foolish maneuver on their part, but hey, they do those things sometimes. Come out a little bit further out. Again, you can always hit the brakes if you feel like you're starting to speed up too much. And we're just going to go nice and wide here, just like that. Perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and start getting on the brakes nice and early on this one, just like that. Perfect. Go ahead and tap the brakes and make sure everything's set. So one of the things we're going to be using is we're going to be using this system here to identify our takeoff power. We actually do have a takeoff and go around button on this one. This is button right here. Kind of a fun button. We can play with that. You got to make sure your auto thrust is engaged for that purpose. I find it tends to over rev the engines. So I try to just do it by hand because I find it a little easier. Our flaps are set. Our trim is set. Everything is ready to go. We're just going to roll. Pull it back. Our selected speed is 240 right now. Our selected altitude is 290,000. Flight level 290. And of course, our roll and pitch is armed on the flight director. Same problem we had before. We're just going to kind of come out, and then we're going to go ahead and gently kick it over. Like I say, when you're kicking it over, sometimes it helps to kind of get in this, just go like that. I don't know, it just makes it easier for me to see where we're going on the ground here. And again, you can do one of these things. Nope, I actually need to let the plane come a little bit further. There we go, that's delightful. Now we are ready for takeoff. Center that the best I can, looks good. Park and brake on, and we're ready to go ahead and kick this thing on. So what we need to do is we need to increase engine power like that, and we need to try to keep the green inside of the yellow. That's kind of goofy. So what I'm going to do is disengage park and brake, hold my regular brakes, and I'm going to push it to about here. See how the green line's coming up very rapidly? What you will observe is the maximum green is pretty darn high right now. Give it just a little tiny bit more. Don't go into the yellow. Release. Off we go. So we now have 4 minutes and 50 seconds of this power available to us. And it's actually too high. I have to pull the throttle back a little bit here. And you can see what I was kind of saying, where like you have to kind of put it like 10% low. That might have been last video. That's okay. There we go. Delightful. All right, we're rolling. That's 80 knots right there. I didn't say this was a short takeoff and landing aircraft. I'm pretty sure I didn't say that. Airspeed's right here. Airspeed's right there in case you missed it. Yes, we did not turn on landing lights, but that's okay. 120. You need a little bit of right. I see somebody on the runway. Why would you do that? All right, 140. We're going to lift the nose up. Hold it right there. Gear comes up pretty much right away.
Too low gear. Too low gear. Too low.
Bring up a click of flaps.
Too low gear.
You don't say.
Too low gear.
Just going to hold it steady here. 500 feet. The nose come down a little bit. We are on our way. We used about 1 minute and 25 seconds worth of our maximum engine rating time here. We're just going to hold it steady here. It's about 177 knots. We're picking up speed very smoothly. I'm going to go ahead and come down here and switch to our navigational display. Now I'm going to go ahead and execute my turn. This aircraft I find in turns, it's just a big brick. And if you think of it as a big brick, you realize you don't really have to work it that hard. Even with like things like the rudders, I find that I don't have to go very hard on the rudder at any point with this particular aircraft. So we're going to execute our right turn. We're basically picking up speed now. You can see I'm doing 215. No, you're not hallucinating. The airspeed tape is upside down. That is just the nature of this beast. I'm going to come around. You can see we're just about hitting 230 knots there. You can see it very clearly on the display. And like I said, we're taking a pretty smooth turn here. We have no specific bank limits. If we wanted to put a bank limit on, one of the cool things is there's actually this little knob here. We can actually adjust that, and that will basically adjust what those are. Again, since we're not on autopilot, you're not going to see the little indicator coming around. So what I'm doing now is I'm just executing my turn, as building up as much speed as I can. We'll get a nice little look at the airport over our right as we come by here. It's about 2:45. Like I say, I find this thing relatively easy to read. No surprises. Again, take that nice gentle turn. We're pretty much the limit of our bank angle right now. We don't want to do any more than this. I can see I'm doing about 252. I'll pull my nose up just a little bit more. Because we are so darn light, we can kind of, not that we're cheating or anything like that, so we're doing fine. Looking over on my right, you'll probably observe that my maximum continuous rating time disappeared. Now, the reason it did that is because the aircraft is actually running cool enough, because we're at a slightly higher altitude, that even though it was too much a second ago, it's not too much now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach over here to my autopilot. I'm going to go ahead and press the LNAV button. What that's going to do is that's going to arm mission as my current navigational input. You can see that very clearly right there. Again, I'm flying this one by hand. I just find it easier to fly by hand, at least the way that they set it up initially. Come to my right a little bit. Swing this way. Again, I'm trying to line myself up with my lateral navigation, my mission, if you want to think of it another way. We are going a little fast, but that's okay. Give it a couple clicks of flaps. Again, does not take much. Very stable aircraft. I'm going to go ahead and engage the automatic pilot. I have a button for that. And now that that's engaged, since we already armed LNAV, you can actually see the aircraft is holding our current pitch and is attempting to basically fly to that particular course that we selected down here just a few moments ago. So that's looking pretty good. The aircraft is going to come swinging to the left in a second after it acquires it. If you run into this problem, you can always pull the throttle down. I find that's banking too much, so I'm actually going to shut that off, and I'm going to take it over by hand.
Autopilot. Autopilot.
Pop that back off. Now, as you can see, the way that they configured the autopilot, and I mentioned this earlier, is they were very, very aggressive with some of the tuning on it. And as a result, it tends to do things like that, where it basically tries to chase something down when it would have been much simpler if it had just gone straight. Like I said, you got to be able to fly this aircraft by hand. That's one of the things I do recognize. Hit the autopilot again. There we go. Much better. There we are. Now it's going to behave. Watch it. Watch it. Keep an eye on it. Nice. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go ahead and set up the automatic thrust system as we do our nice gentle climb here. We're holding about 7.5 degrees. Unfortunately for us, when we come over here and fiddle with this, this one does not let us set the specific bank angle or anything like that. We just dialed it in by basically setting the autopilot when we're ready. Getting a little fast. I'm just going to pull the throttle back again. Nice. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and set up the auto-throttle. Auto-throttle on. Set the speed I'd like to travel at. We'll do 250 knots is fine. I'm going to go ahead and right-click this to arm it, and I'm simply going to engage it. Just like that. Now, the cool thing here is the aircraft will now automatically attempt to maintain its constant thrust. And we can see our indicated airspeed is 250, and now the throttles are going to start working themselves for the purposes of keeping it at that setting. The other thing we want to do here, since we're still in max thrust mode, is we want to switch this down to either intermediate thrust mode, or we want to switch it down to max continuous thrust mode. So for us, I'm going to leave it on intermediate today, just to keep it easy. And you can see our aircraft has done a very nice job of coming down to our selected speed of 250 knots. And you can also see that we're having a pretty hefty climb. We're getting about 2,020 feet per minute, which is not bad. So like I said, we're cruising. We're definitely cruising. If you have a noisy joystick, by the way, you want to be a little extra cautious with using the auto throttle, because if you don't pull it to 0 like I had to do here, this whole joystick will start jerking back and forth as it basically constantly tries to adjust itself. So at this point, it's just a matter of relaxing. And I can see here that we're cruising no problem. Pretty good angle of attack. Let's again that magical 7.5 degrees. And obviously when we cross 10,000 feet, we can accelerate a little bit. One of the cool things is if you actually come down here, this little yellow bar is actually adjusted to notify us the fact that our speed limit basically gets higher as we start to get a little bit higher altitude as well. So that would be that one. In the real world, what we do is we come up here and we'd snap all of our light switches off for our landing lights because we no longer need them. What we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to adjust our climb speed to 270. All I'm going to do is adjust it, right-click to actually say I'm okay with this. And what you'll see here is the engines completely ignore the fact they're supposed to have a limit on them, and they just go up to full throttle instead in order to make sure that 270 knots is achieved. I did mention there were a couple bugs, right? Again, that's me looking at you over in the audience there. Cool. So you can see the engine pulls itself back down after it gets to a certain speed. What we have to do now is basically monitor everything on our climb upwards, but don't you worry. I'll skip that part until we get to the top of our climb. All right, we've got about 1,000 feet to go in our ascent here. Everything's been running pretty smoothly so far. We basically left the engine on automatic, and you can see it has no problem, like I said, violating its maximum power. But you can also see that we've slowly started to climb the Mach numbers here as well. Now you have to pay really close attention here and get your hand on the altitude hold option. The reason being is if it wants to overshoot, you want to catch it. And now this is especially going to overshoot in the event that you didn't set things up earlier. So now that we're set, we can go ahead and get the aircraft all configured for cruise. We're going to be cruising at 0.74 on the Machs here. So I'm going to come into here and dial in 0.74, and all I'm going to do is right-click once, and that's going to basically say, hey, this is my desired speed. You can see that the throttle is completely ignoring my limits, again, but as you can also see, it says spooling up my 0.74 Mach here. There's your lovely DLSS in action there. Once those two lines touch each other, which they will in just a few moments, my engines are going to start slowly spooling down, as you can see there on the right. And now we enter into our cruising phase of our journey today. While we're cruising here, we'll go take a look at some of the other options we have. We've got that nice little autopilot in the real world. This should get a little bigger if I lean into it. It gets smaller. It moves with us rather than against us. It's not quite how autopilots work. That's okay, though. One of the things you want to note here is the fact that our airspeed is on the left, our altitude is on the right. You have vertical speed listed right here. Down here, you can see where we're going. We're in mission mode, we're in altitude hold mode, and you can see our current speed there as well as our current path vector. So it makes it relatively easy for that particular purpose. Now, as we're cruising here, the things we need to be thinking about, of course, are things like how we're going to get back down. What's our approach going to look like? Obviously, in air traffic control is very famous for giving you about 1,001 different instructions to make your life a little bit more difficult. But one of the things I will do while I'm up here, of course, is I'm going to come down here. I'm going to dial in my handy-dandy target here for my decision height. I'm just going to click on that. Now we're going to use 200 feet here. Pretty easy approach today. Nothing pretty chaotic here. There is this little option down here which gives you the ability to set the map range. So if I crank this thing up to 320, you can actually see, assuming that it doesn't lag us here, all the way to our destination. Now, the crazy thing here is trying to figure out where we're going to start our descent to get us down to runway 20. Obviously, we could do the math on that one. We're at 29,000 feet. 29,000 feet divided by 1,000. We're going to divide by 3. I'm sorry, 29 times 3, my apologies. It's about 87 nautical miles from our destination, which is not too bad for us. That's going to get us at a good position. If we're curious how far, we can always come down to our FMS, and we can see very clearly that Barnes Air Force Base is about 243 miles away. Something's not quite right with this, though. I'm not quite sure why that number is so large, but I can see very clearly that Leeds is basically chilling right there, large and in charge, ready for us. And it's about 178 miles away, so we have plenty of time to get here. While we're cruising around, too, another thing I like to pay attention to is our fuel situation. Now, this aircraft is, we're lucky. We started all of our engines at the same time, which means that we don't have to worry too much about transferring fuel. But one of the incredible things about this aircraft, we can shut off our engine ignition, my apologies for not doing that sooner, is we can actually pull fuel out of things and move it around into the different tanks. Now, the way this works is pretty scary. You have to just kind of be mindful when you're fiddling with this. Because you have the ability to open a tank, and you have the ability to open a tank for the purposes of emptying the tank. Now, when you think of those two things real quickly, you realize you could really quickly start slashing things around. This also gives you a really cool trick here in the fact that we can actually remember, your engine only gets fuel from wherever this is connected. We actually have the ability to run this engine off of everybody else. Because what we could do is open up the crossfeed. I'm not going to. Open up the fill, the transfers that you see right here where my mouses are, and we could pump the fuel out and run it directly into an engine in the event that we wanted to bypass a specific tank. Now, the reason that's so fascinating is they have that system basically enabled for us ready to go. Now, let me go ahead and take a look at our fuel situation here. I don't want to do anything that's going to be stupid. So, for example, here you can see we have 3133 chilling in tank number 2. If I wanted to fill tank number 1, I have that ability to do so. Notice there's nothing in here for the purposes of actually filling the center tank. That's your extended range tank. You're really not supposed to be refilling that in flight. That's something you're really only going to use in a pinch. Now, one of the cool things is, if you see this button here, that's what isolates the two fuel systems from each other. This is an important concept here, because if I wanted to fill these two sets of tanks, for example, you're going to have to make sure that it's basically set up to allow that fuel to transfer from one side to the other. Now watch this. Let's say I want to fill up tank number 2. I don't know why I'd want to do this. This is really goofy, but for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to open these two tanks. Nothing's going to happen because we have no fuel coming out yet. Now, if I come over here and open my transfer pumps, you'll actually start pumping fuel out of your pressure here into the fuel pressure right into here. It'll actually start flipping this over. Now, the cool thing is, if you notice when I hold my mouse over this, it says in up, and they're letting you know that in the real world, it would work. In this sim, it does not work. The important thing that does work here, I'll go ahead and untransfer all that here, is we do have the ability to run the cross feeds, which are also in up. Sigh. The cool thing here, of course, is when you do look at this, in the event that you're seeing this, when they update all these things, that's actually the process you would be utilizing for the purposes of getting it all to flow through. So what we're going to do now is, this is a really good spot to go ahead and call it a video, and our next video will be taking a look at descent as well as approach. Enjoy.